Naked motorcycles. They are by far the most popular category of street motorcycles on sale today, and we see that on our videos as well. Anything we post about naked bikes usually does better than any other type of motorcycle. But today, we want to see the evolution and the history of naked motorcycles. So back in the day, you had something like this Thruxton over here. People didn't really conceive of fully fared bikes or naked bikes. They just made good standard motorcycles like this, and you just kind of did whatever you wanted with them and however you wanted with them. Fast forward a couple of years, and then people started putting fairings on motorcycles, and those motorcyclists started crashing their bikes and turning them into street fighters. Manufacturers got whiff of this, and they started making street fighters from the factory. You have the first kind of naked motorcycle starting to come into the fold. This Honda Hornet 919 is an awesome example of one. Derived from a CBR 900RR, this is a great example of an all-arounder motorcycle that can be great on the street. However, in the last 10 years or so, it seems that motorcycling has kind of lost its mind. And nowadays, you have something like the Aprilia Tuono V4 that is a flagship naked bike making 175 horsepower and is like way too fast for basically anybody. So what the f happened?
Let's start out with a little history lesson on naked motorcycles. As I'm sure you guessed, they probably weren't called naked bikes back in the day, modern sensibilities being what they are. You had two different motorcycles back in the day, sport bikes and standard motorcycles. We'll start out with standards. Standards are Bonnevilles, basically. It's a motorcycle where you feel like you're sitting in a chair, something that's super comfortable, very chilled out for the street, and generally designed to just be a good commuting motorcycle. Then you have sport bikes, and the ethos there hasn't really changed at all in the intervening years. It's just go fast, hit apexes, lean as far as you can, and win races. The only real difference between the old sport bikes and modern sport bikes is modern sport bikes are faster and they have more tech. Otherwise, they're functionally identical. But in the 80s, when riders binned their sport bikes and didn't want to spend a whole bunch of money on new fairings, you had this trend developing where they would take all the busted plastics off their bike, throw them in the bin, put handlebars on it, and call it a street fighter. These were the same sport motorcycles underneath, just with a handlebar, no plastics, and a single round headlight. Sound familiar? Now, those motorcycles were noticed by manufacturers like Triumph and Ducati. Ducati beat Triumph to the punch though. In 1993, they released the first street fighter motorcycle from the factory in the Ducati Monster. A year later, you had Triumph come out with their Speed Triple, which sought to give you all of the sport bike power in a more streetable package. Old Triumphs being what they were though, it was about as temperamental as the British weather, but it didn't really catch on because it was just Eurobros doing Eurobro stuff. But then suddenly, Honda got wind of what they were doing. Honda sat around the table and had a big think. How could they capitalize on this new emerging market and spend as little money as possible? Well, they had a phenomenal motorcycle in their CBR 600 F3, and they thought, what if we just took all the plastics off and sold it? And that's exactly what they did. They came out with the Honda Hornet 599, the little brother of the Honda Hornet 919, which we have right here. This is basically the same thing, just bigger. This is when you started to see the word naked bike appear, when you had a sport bike on the dealership showroom, and then you had right next to it a stripped back version of it that was for sale with a slightly more detuned engine, easier ergonomics, and less plastic in the way. Yamaha did the same thing with their FZ6 and FZ1s. You had Kawasaki do the same thing with their Z line of motorcycles. And then Suzuki really pushed the envelope in 2008 when they stripped all the fairings off their Hayabusa and sold you the B-King.
Now, unfortunately for Suzuki, they picked literally the worst year to launch a new motorcycle. In 2008, as many of you may recall, that was the financial crash, and we actually had the motorcycle market implode overnight. The B-King was way ahead of its time and was launched way too prior to when things actually started kicking off. Now, when did they start kicking off? Well, we can trace the hyper naked motorcycle back to 2014 when KTM launched the original Super Duke. That motorcycle was based a little bit on the RC8R Superbike, but it had had a different frame and a way bigger engine, right? The Super Duke came with a 1301cc V-twin doing 175 horsepower, and it basically blew everyone's hair back of being like, you can't put that in a naked bike, that's insane. Now, for reference, an FZ1 back in the day was making about 145 horsepower, and people thought that was pretty potent, but the KTM Super Duke really redefined everything that we thought of as being extremely fast in a naked motorcycle. So much so that nowadays, Honda's CB1000R, a beautiful motorcycle, is often lambasted as the slow, anemic hyper-naked in today's crop of bikes. Now, the Super Duke was actually the first naked bike thought of and conceived from the ground up to actually be super fast. It wasn't some homologated race bike that they turned into a naked bike. It was its very own thing. Now, once KTM ripped the Band-Aid off, the floodgates were truly opened and all the other manufacturers saw a golden new niche that they could fill in themselves. Aprilia updated the Tuono with the 1100 series. Yamaha came out with the MT-10 line of bikes. Kawasaki snorted all the cocaine into the ZH2. Suzuki said me too and threw in the Gixxer style, which is basically just a K6 Gixxer, but it's still pretty good too. And we now have a whole new wide world of hyper-naked motorcycles. So much so that nowadays, many manufacturers make their stepping stone middleweight bikes, which are actually even faster and make more horsepower than the old naked bikes that were designed to be finisher bikes as well. It's really a crazy world we live in nowadays. Now, history is all well and good, but let's take a look at the design differences between these old school flagship naked bikes and these new modern hyper naked motorcycles. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, this is Yan with YN Moto. Today we're looking at the Nolan N87 helmet. Other helmets, they don't work wet. This thing works wet or dry. You can use this thing on your favorite back roads, country roads, whatever kind of roads you want to go on. This thing is DOT rated, ECE rated, and Sharp 4-star rated as well. Other helmets, you're looking like a baseball cap on your head. This thing's going to keep you protected anywhere you go. This helmet's working twice as hard for you. Why do you want to crap your helmet for more money? This bad boy's got a fog-resistant visor, Climacool padding, and eyewear adaptive in case you want to be a sport-touring dad. What's not to like? It's made in Italy. You know the Italians make good stuff. This baby's also got a fully adjustable VPS sunscreen with 400 UV protection. Didn't know you needed to stay protected against the sun while you rode, did you? Here's some gooch juice we collected from one afternoon ride here in Texas. Now you grab some of this, regular helmets, you put it in a helmet here, that is gonna stick. That is gonna get inside your shell, that is gonna smell bad all day long. Here, the Nolan over here, gonna do this in real time. You follow me, camera guy? You put the gooch juice in the Nolan, see that? It sticks, it resists, it doesn't get into your helmet. This will not get you stick, it will stay virtually dry all day long. Get yourself over to shop.yamaha.co and get yourself one of these bad boys. Look, you're gonna go online, spend $550 on some Ruroc helmet that's not even gonna have the same features as this thing. Don't be silly. $325 gets you this helmet right here, but if you go right now to shop.yamaha.co, get yourself 10% off this helmet right here. That's $300 with this helmet full of features. Go to shop.yamaha.co, get yourself this Nolan N87 helmet today. All right, folks, bringing it back here, we're gonna take a deeper look at both of these bikes side by side because there's so much that has changed and evolved on these two bikes, right, Spite?
It's kind of hard to believe that these are in the same category.
Yes, for their time. We have to say, obviously this is a way bigger engine, but for their time, these were both flagship naked bikes.
Yes, so the first thing that I notice on these bikes is the difference in the handlebars.
Yeah.
So the handlebar setup on the Hornet here, it is so narrow.
Yep. And that's an OE bar that we fitted onto it.
Yes.
From the parts catalog.
This is how it was meant to come from the factory. It is crazy narrow. It almost feels like my hands are right together on here, where normally on a modern naked bike, you're in this kind of brawly attack stance.
Yeah, this is way wider, way flatter. There's not as much of a sweep and it doesn't come back as far. So it's a super different bar setup on the Tuono.
Yeah, and that changes how you sit on the motorcycle, which we'll talk about in a minute. But then the next thing that I see on the Tuono that I don't see here is a massive frame.
Yep.
I mean, it is gigantic on that motorcycle.
Yeah, the nature of these bikes over the years has been to become bigger, beefier, laterally more rigid all around. And I mean, my God, this is a beefy frame. And you really only notice how beefy it is when you look at the old school bikes. I mean, that has a delicate, spindly little frame holding it in place right there. We were saying that if you were to put this engine in there, it would tear that bike in half.
Yeah, I mean, so the frame itself on this looks like part of the frame rail, but it's not. It's just a cover.
Yeah.
So the frame actually comes up here, goes down the center, and then goes back down like a hook.
Yeah.
And then you have a bolted on subframe.
Yeah.
that's just basically a stick of tube steel.
Yeah, this is a massive aluminum twin spar frame here that's really sophisticated, and then a bolted on subframe as well, but probably made from some fancy lightweight part that I don't even know about.
Yeah, it's like aerospace grade plastic or something like that.
Yeah. The next thing I noticed, and I have to point it out, is the difference in the size of the seats. This is something that's changed on bikes a lot. You can see it on older fully faired motorcycles. You have these big fat tail sections. That has a pretty svelte tail section for the time, I will say, because older 600s and those kind of bikes in that category had really big fat tails. Nowadays, everything is like this tiny, I mean, this isn't even a seat. This is not a seat.
No.
But it has passenger pegs. Look, who's gonna sit on that?
Nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, really, modern motorcycles like this are designed for one rider.
Yeah.
You're really not supposed to have a passenger. You theoretically could have one on there, but why would you? And whereas this is like, it's just a city bike, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what CB back in the day was supposed to mean, is like city bike.
Yep.
And this is really comfortable to have a passenger on. I can actually say that from personal experience. My girlfriend rode 2-up on this bike all the time.
Yep.
And it was a really easy place for her to sit on. I wouldn't put anybody 2-up on the Tuono.
No, probably because they'd be screaming about 5 minutes into it, right? Because it's such a hair on fire ride. The next big thing I noticed is the suspension, right? Obviously, suspension has come a long way in the last 10 years or so, but the big difference to me is how much beefier these forks are, the fact that they're upside down, and they're electronically controlled. It makes that look like Huffy bike forks.
Yeah, I know. And this is fully adjustable suspension off of an old superbike. It was off the old 900RR.
It's still good hardware.
But the crazy thing is just how teensy it looks by comparison.
Yeah.
And it's comical to see a upside or a right side up fork setup nowadays. You just don't see them anymore.
Yeah, you really don't.
And it's, you know, it looks old, but again, it still works well. But then you look at that, like we are living in the future.
This is. Yeah, if you ever want to be sure that you're living in the future, you got to get 2 old bikes, or an old bike and a new bike side by side. You really start seeing the differences. Obviously, of course, you flick the dash here, massive screen comes up, traction control, rider rates, all this amazing stuff. The Hornet can't even conceive of having a brain like that, you know? I mean, that's
it's got a choke.
It does have a choke for some reason. This was in the mid-2000s where manufacturers were starting to roll out EFI for basically everything, but they're like, well, people are going to be confused as to why there's no choke, so let's still put a choke for some reason. It's like how the Busa has the idle adjuster on the handlebar. It's super weird stuff from the mid-2000s.
I also like on these motorcycles how there's a lot of differences in the way hardware is mounted.
Yes.
So if we look at the passenger peg setup here, we have this big long arm as opposed to something coming down that holds the exhaust, right?
Because that's not the factory exhaust, right? The factory one came out the back.
Yeah, this was originally supposed to be a twin undertail exhaust, but you still don't
We made it better.
Yeah, it's just a big improvement. But this whole situation right here, you don't see that much anymore. You don't see these big long arms on things. Everything's smaller. Everything's been cut nice and svelte so that it looks cleaner.
That's one thing for me as I'm thinking of too now is that motorcycle is so much easier to service than this thing. That's a difference that we haven't really talked about is all this performance and craziness comes at the cost of you need to take this to the dealership for basically anything. I am not taking apart this whole thing and getting in there and doing stuff to this motorcycle, no chance.
You want to run a full system on that bike, you basically have to disconnect the whole subframe.
Yeah, you have to literally take the subframe off and get in there. So yeah, that's a point for the older bikes is that they're way easier to work on and operate and maintain. And they're relatively simple, all things considered, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a twist cable throttle. You can still hear the butterfly valves going. I think that this motorcycle is smaller too. That's the thing that you'll notice about these older motorcycles is they are physically smaller. These ones nowadays, they have such big engines, they've gotten really jacked.
Yeah.
And you see that when you sit on it.
Yep.
Despite the weight actually being fairly similar between these. This is about 460, 480 pounds fully fueled and ready to go. And that's what, 470, I believe?
465, something like that.
465?
Yeah.
So the weight hasn't dropped all that much, but it has just gotten so sophisticated over there.
Yeah, it really has. But, you know, taking all that in mind, we should probably talk a little bit about the intentions of both of these motorcycles.
Yes.
Now, when you think about the intent of both of these motorcycles, things have changed a lot over time. Now, sport bikes back in the day have been the same as they've always been. The intent was always to go as fast as possible around a racetrack, get your bike homologated, and try to whoop butt in World Superbike. That was basically all that there ever was to them. But naked bikes have changed a little bit, right, Spite?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that KTM broke the rules a little bit in 2014 when they made the Super Duke. Because, of course, KTM, ready to race, right? So they made this hyper naked motorcycle with superbike power and theoretically superbike handling. They didn't quite nail it in 2014, but they got really close.
Yeah.
I mean, that bike handled really, really well. And they were like, yeah, this is a motorcycle that you can ride on the street and on the track in equal measure.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that really altered what people thought a naked bike could be.
Yeah.
Because this motorcycle, the last thing I want to do when I ride it is rail it. You know, it's just, it doesn't give you that feeling.
Yeah, no, the older naked bikes had much more of a cruisery kind of quality to them. They were very nice to ride. They were well-mannered, polite. I mean, that's the thing I always think of when I ride the Hornet. I'm like, oh, it's so polite, you know? It's so nice. It's a friendly motorcycle. Whereas these things nowadays are not friendly at all.
No.
New naked bikes are all angry and vicious. Even the middleweight ones that are now faster than this thing ever was, like we said earlier in the video, they're all really aggressive. The Street Triple, the 890 Duke, the MT-09, they're all really muscly and mad. And that, I think, had something to do with that 2014 KTM Super Duke started being like, oh, people want their cake and eat it too, right? They want a bike that they can ride around all day on the street, but if they want to go tear up a track, it won't be too difficult to. And I've taken the 210 out on track, not this one, but the prior gen, the 2019, it was basically just a super bike with handlebars. So it's like, there's no difference, really. Whereas this is a big, big, big difference over a proper sport bike.
Yeah, I would argue that you could, if you wanted to, take this thing out and really rail it. I mean, it's still an inline 4 that's making like 100-ish horsepower to crank. It still handles really well. The fully adjustable suspension works well, but it's got a longer wheelbase than most modern motorcycles. The handlebar is just so narrow, and you're so upright too. That's one thing that we've noticed with the handlebar position is longer, wider, flatter bars, so that you're sitting more forward. You're in that aggressive attack stance, even on a naked motorcycle.
Yeah, and the 210 is very aggressive. We will say it's borderline naked, right? Everyone always gives us crap about all these fairings that are on them as if we put them on there. They're like, that's not a naked bike. Take it up with Aprilia, not us, right? But yeah, I think basically what they've done is they've split the difference between this, which is a pure naked bike, right, and a sport bike. This is somewhere in between. These new naked bikes are somewhere in between the old naked bikes and sport bikes.
Yeah, and you've lost that feeling where you had your fully faired motorcycle in, say, the CBR 900RR, or the 929, or the 919RR, and this, which was sitting next to it, being the street version, the chill version. You don't have that anymore.
No.
The MT-10 is still a stripped down R1. I'd say it's the closest that we have to that. It's really an R1 without fairings, but it's still... It's detuned in the sense that it's not making 200 horsepower, but it's still absolutely off the wall.
So maybe, if we take a step back, maybe Honda's had it right all along. The CB650 and the CB1000, maybe those are real naked. Instead of taking it to the nth degree over here, maybe Honda, we're making fun of them, saying that they're all anemic and bad, but maybe it's the right choice.
I mean, it does have that more chilled out character about it. And I think that's, again, we go back to KTM breaking the rules in 2014, where they completely redefined what a naked bike could do. And Honda was just like, no, naked bikes are chill. They're meant to cruise.
And they never made a proper hyper naked, really.
No.
They never did.
And I don't think we'll see a proper hyper naked from Honda.
They made the most zoinked out sport bike ever in the form of the Fireblade, but they didn't make a hyper naked bike. Yeah, it'd be kind of cool if they made like a callback to the 90s bikes with like a naked Fireblade or something. That'd be nuts.
Yeah, that would absolutely be wild.
They won't do it though. They won't do it. I think KTM is kind of a funny case because they, I think they've gone publicly and said that they don't want to make super sport motorcycles because they feel that they are inappropriate for the street,
They're
right?
too dangerous.
Too dangerous. But they will sell you a Super Duke Evo that has like slick tires and it makes like 190 horsepower. I'm like, guys, what? You're losing the thread here. Like, what's going on? Yeah, I think KTM is an odd duck that has changed the landscape a little bit. But yeah, if you guys have never ridden one of these older naked bikes, honestly, there are so many gems and classics. And we see in the comments all the time, you guys point out the Honda F4i, the FZ6, the FZ1. There are so many great classic examples of these more chilled out inline 4 bikes you can go and ride and enjoy. We love the little Hornet here. It's a great motorcycle.
Personally, if I'm reaching for the keys, I have an emotional attachment to this motorcycle that borders on unhealthy.
True.
But if I'm going to try and just have a good time on the street, I want a motorcycle more like this.
Same.
The 210 is way too much.
Yeah.
Even the Super Duke. I would love to own a 2015 Super Duke, but I look at it and I'm like, why do you exist? Why do you have so much torque? It's
sensory overload at some point, you know?
Yeah.
And I think on the street, you just want something more mellow and fun enough like this. And now everyone's gonna say that we're a bunch of babies and we need to ride a real bike or whatever.
I rode a Turbo Busa yesterday, guys. Don't worry, we still like to go fast, but we also like to chill.
Yeah.
And this is chill.
Yeah, I think these bikes are just great jack-of-all-trades motorcycles. They're the new kind of UJM, and that's why that they hold their value pretty well, and they're great motorcycles. So that's going to wrap up our little evolution of naked bikes videos. What did you guys think? Let us know down below what your opinion is about these new insane hyper-naked motorcycles versus the tried and true classic naked bikes over here. And we'll catch you in the next one. See you later. Keep watching Amy Noob!